Hello and welcome to Roundtable. The world is getting back to normal, and that is going to cost you. After 18 months when gas wasn't needed so much, prices are soaring with increased demand and not enough reserves. How will Europe manage without the lights going out? Well, it's been in the headlines every day in the UK for weeks now, and if there is similar pain elsewhere, could there be a free-for-all as countries try to keep their people warm and companies running? Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. One of our guests today says British industry may have to shut down for a period without access to power, something not seen since the three-day week of the 1970s. And who has priority as the world wakes up? Is it people or is it business? Well, in Spain, they are lowering a special energy tax and giving around about 2.6 billion euros to customers. There'll be a cap on gas prices. Italy and 3 billion euros is going to less well-off groups. Greece, financial assistance to most households, a subsidy for the first 300 kilowatt hours every month, one-off payments, and bigger discounts. While in France, the government's going to give a one-off €100 payment to pretty much 6 million households that are subsidised already. Well, let's bring into this roundtable first of all Richard Ballantyne. He's in London and is the chief exec of the British Ports Association. We head to Scotland, to Auchterarder, and we see John Baldwin, managing director at CNG, a service focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And with me in the studio, Tim Skeet, City Banking Executive and an advisor to the Trade Association. John, I'm going to come to you first of all, because you're very big on renewable energy. And the question I want you to answer for our viewers is whether, in fact, we're in this position, not just the UK, but the world, because we've gone too fast.
I think we've gone too fast with renewable energy. I think we've gone too fast with demolishing the resilience in the system. So, for example, the UK has pretty much closed all its coal-fired generation plants, and it's closed its major strategic storage facility at Rough. And at the same time, the North Sea gas production has been declining every year. So those three things taken together mean that even though on a windy day it looks really good, we have very low carbon electricity, when it's not windy, we don't have coal, we don't have gas storage, and we're relying on gas. And that gas is really going to have to be imported from the Middle East or US shale. And I think that's the cause of the problem.
It would appear to me that we've gone so far down the road in terms of decommissioning and in terms of investing in green energy that there's no going back on this. So how many years before we're in a position to be able to thumb our noses at those Middle Eastern and other gas imports?
Well, probably quite a long time, actually, because building these big facilities, nuclear power stations, which would be resilient, or gas storage, they're all 5-10-year projects. And so really we are in a bit of a pickle for at least 5 years, I think. There are things we can do, but for 5 years, it's going to be very stressful getting through the winter in Great Britain, unfortunately.
OK, we'll come back to you because I know you've got many thoughts on this, John. But Richard, let me ask you, Chief Executive of the Ports and Harbours Association, either you're bringing stuff in for other people or you're needing it for yourselves and the people who work with you on the ships. How big an issue is this going to be if prices stay high and we can't sort it out within 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's manageable, I would say. I don't think we're in a disastrous situation, so I'd sort of quell some of the concerns from our sector. But I have to say, it's like no other period of time, having a COVID pandemic, having Brexit changes coming in for the ports industry, and this sort of energy transition, I think, is quite a serious time for the industry to get to grips with what the expectations are.
I look at the headlines and listen to the radio, watch TV in this country. Some of it's international, but it doesn't focus on minutiae like this when it comes to other countries. So I don't really know whether the UK is alone in this or whether, in fact, it's every country in the Western or wider world.
Yeah, I think we've seen challenges with our sort of international partners elsewhere. I don't think we're alone. But given the island nature of the UK and our sort of fairly dramatic departure from the EU, and one or two other dynamics which are exercising minds of policymakers and industry jointly at the moment. I think it's a perfect storm with global gluts in container surges and challenges looking at fuel provision to the domestic markets. I think all in all, these price increases are going to add up to inflation and be something that the industry, such as my sector and others, just have to deal with.
1978, 79, winter of discontent. Remember it well. Are we going to see another one of those where people can't afford to run companies, garbage is left on the streets?
Well, I mean, that's the interesting
question. Going back earlier, the 3-day week.
I remember that pretty well. I was just going up to university at that time, and are we going to see that again? I don't think it'll be that bad, but we are running the risk. And the question is, what is the plan? I mean, I actually agree with what both the other speakers have said in terms of analysing the problem, but what they haven't mentioned is the supply and demand. There's a huge demand for liquefied natural gas and gas generally, a surge out of Asia, so there's competition. You've got the Russians offering to open up more supply at the moment, so there is a kind of political dimension to gas supplies. There is also the question around energy transition. Is natural gas an acceptable transition source of energy or not? And there is confused thinking at European level, and that's not a British problem specifically. So, we are looking at a combination of things. Brexit hasn't helped. The lack of planning at the government hasn't helped. The tendency for a government to blame business doesn't help. All of those things, I think, come together, along with the factors which have been identified by both Richard and John just now. And I think we could be in for a rough ride. Certainly prices, inflation, prices, the consumer will be suffering. Who's going to get the blame? Because at the end of the day, there will be a blame game. And we see that played out at the Manchester conference just recently.
Well, I'll ask you in a moment whose fault it is, because the Russians are saying, hey, nothing to do with us. And right now on this programme, we're going to hear, first of all, from Vladimir Putin in person, and then I'm going to read out something that he's quoted of having said. First bit, here we go.
Our European partners' practice. This practice once again confirmed that, in fact, they've made mistakes.
And then we have this from Putin in the Financial Times. Let's think through possibly increasing supply in the market, only we need to do it carefully, settle with Gazprom and talk it over. This speculative craze doesn't do us any good. I think he's trying to say it's not our fault, that we can sort this out, but how could it be sorted out?
Well, I mean, that's the supply issue. He's got supply, he can provide it. That could stabilise the market if they were so minded. And I think he's offering an olive branch potentially. But then, of course, it's incredibly complicated, the relationship with Russia these days. But there is also the demand factor. And I think what we do need to be thinking about isn't simply how we deal with the problem now. It's how do we, to borrow a horrible phrase from the government, the Build Back Better. Because I think what our two other speakers have identified is we've gone into this without infrastructure, without a plan, without storage, including across the EU. So let's not see this as a peculiarly British...
But could this have been avoided?
This could have been probably avoided. It could have been avoided. The UK could have done a better job preparing for this. In other words, foreseeing the fact that there are days, and if you look back at it, we are something like 40-45% renewable sources of energy. We've cut out the coal. I think John very eloquently pointed out that. We did it a little bit faster than we could have done. The wind hasn't been blowing. We've had a shortfall in supply. And, by the way, we're highly reliant on the spot market for gas. And again, we haven't got the long-term contracts. If you look at Japan, for instance, they lock in a lot of long-term gas supply contracts. We haven't done that. That's why 10 gas supply companies have gone bust in the past couple of months.
John, I don't know whether you were watching the cricket at the end of the summer from the Oval, but there's a massive structure there that's called the gasometer. Whether or not it works anymore, it was always an indication of how much supply there was if it went up in the air. This thing was completely empty. Now, I don't know whether that's related to what we're seeing at the moment, but I'm just wondering, how could we have been better prepared? Where could it have been stored, and why wasn't it?
Well, yeah, that has nothing to do with the sort of seasonal storage that we're talking about, the large volumes that we need to get us through winter. I think there were probably two or three mistakes. Firstly, when the United Kingdom continental shelf production was declining, we should have been investing in gas storage. Because when we had the gas in the North Sea, that was de facto the storage. We didn't need any more. But instead, the opposite happened. In 2015, Centrica, who owned Rough, said, this thing's not safe anymore. It's our major gas storage facility. They said to the government, look, we need to spend £500 million to make it safe, and so we carry on for another 20 years. And the government said, well, we don't think you need to do that. We don't really need storage because we'll just trade our way. When it's cold in winter, we'll just buy LNG and it'll come in on a ship, and we've got lots of terminals. So we don't need storage. So Centrica closed it. The problem with that is, and at a very high level, it's really simple to understand. China burns 4,000 million tons of coal a year. So in the UK, we burn 1 million. China burns 4,000 million. And they've got terrible air quality problems. And President Xi is saying, I want our quality of life to be better. I want to have gas networks. I want to have gas in China. And he sent his crews out and said, to get through the winter, I want you to buy LNG. And so the LNG ship that leaves the east coast of America would come across the Atlantic. It now goes through the Panama Canal and it goes to China. And the LNG ships that leave Qatar would have come through the Suez Canal and come to Europe. They now go to China. And it's not obvious that we can actually buy that LNG. So it's quite possible in February next year, we will be trying to buy LNG and the ships will be off to China and there won't be anyone to sell us the LNG because the Chinese have bought it.
Well, listen to this. Listen to this, if you would. I've got these figures here. Natural gas storage in Europe, 72%, roughly 3/4. Normally, 85.5%. Is it going to go down from what you're saying, from that 72.4% to perhaps 60, 50? And if so, what would that mean?
Well, what happens is you should have 100% full at the start of the winter. And during the winter, when you've got cold days, you draw the storage out. And then with a bit of luck, by the end of March, you've still got 20%, it's fine. And then you fill up the storage April, May, June, July, and you start again. What happened last winter was cold, so the storage was emptied. But when gas prices started to rise in summer, and that was really a post-COVID bounce in gas prices, the companies that needed to fill the gas in store, they said, oh, gas prices are too high. I'm not going to buy it now because it'll fall next month. I won't buy it. And it didn't fall. And so it got to August and the storage was empty. And then there was absolute panic. And so we're still at the end of that panic where all the European companies have been trying to get hold of this LNG to fill the store. But President Xi is saying, I want that in China. And
right.
So we've already got this tension between Europe and China, and it's China that sets the world gas price, and it's China that sets the price that consumers in the UK are going to have to pay for gas.
Sounds like we're going to have to be cutting up our beds and burning the wood. Let me talk to you, Richard, on this one. European gas prices up by almost 500% in the past year, trading near record levels. Are they going to go up even further, given what we've heard about the possible bigger shortages that there might be?
Well, I haven't got a crystal ball, but I assume that points towards one development, which is increases in price, of course. Now, if we go back some years, you'll recall the tsunami that tragically hit the coastline of Japan, where some of their nuclear power stations were disastrously hit. And we saw policymakers in Japan opt to move away from nuclear power and towards things like gas imports. And that, of course, completely skewed global gas prices, just as we've been talking about previously. And at the time, the UK saw a lot of decline in its gas imports as a result of that. But there is one, I suppose, consolation, I guess, when you start seeing shortages of supplies, and that could be oil or gas, etc., other fuels, is the price starts to go up. And in a country like the UK, with our oil and gas resources, which are probably, and I'm not an expert here, but probably more expensive to extract than other locations around the world, it is an advantage when oil prices are higher, because it means that our energy companies in the North Sea and elsewhere are encouraged and guaranteed a better price. So they'll go out and extract more. Now, the problem you've got, I think both of our other colleagues and speakers have just highlighted, is that it's not an instant activity. You know, certain things take time to turn on, and wider in terms of energy investments, energy infrastructure, whether that be offshore renewable installations or new power stations, new nuclear power stations, for example. All of those investments and infrastructure projects takes time to come to fruition. So I would suggest that a policy suggestion for government would be moving towards a much more stable supply of its own domestic energy production. And I think we've got a real opportunity for offshore renewables. Now, our territorial waters around the British Isles are immense. And yes, they're not completely filled with wind turbines yet, but there's a huge potential for that sector, and it could take some years.
Well, this is what I'm beginning to understand. It's going to take a great deal longer than most of us will be prepared to put up with. We'll have to put on 6 duffel coats during the course of the winter. I tell you what, let's hear from Jonathan Brearley, head of Britain's energy regulator, Ofgem. He's not too happy and not too hopeful.
So look, it's extremely difficult to predict the future of the gas price, and we have seen some unprecedented changes over the last few months. So just to give you an idea of the scale of change in the gas price is almost 6 times the level it was last year, and indeed it rose 70% in August. So we are in unprecedented cost territory, and I'm afraid, there are many, many factors that have contributed to that, including an increased international demand, potentially some restrictions around supply. So it's very, very hard to predict how long that will last.
Even he has no idea how long this is going to go on.
Well,
would his job?
No, you're talking markets, and the kind of level of demand we've seen post-COVID has taken a lot of people by surprise. How long was COVID?
You don't have to be Nostradamus to know that when the world recovers,
no, but we were locked down
for
2 years. I don't think anybody predicted that. And when we came out, guess what? Industrial production, in particular in China, suddenly taken off. It's not China's fault. They need energy. Our energy requirements are going to double by 2050 as well. So you talk about the infrastructure. It's not just standing still that we need to anticipate. It is the growth in our own energy requirements that we also need to anticipate.
All right, 2 things that we need to understand here from you seers into the future. One is, what do we do in the long term? But considering the fact that winter's just on the doorstep, what can we do in the short term? You think about that, you two, and I'm going to ask you first of all, what do you think?
Well, we will have to accept the fact that cost of energy will increase. So there's little we can do. We are, as I said earlier, exposed to the spot market with insufficient long-term contracts. Now, we can't change that. But what we will need to do is consider how we protect the most vulnerable parts of our society. That will need to be done, and the government will need to grasp that nettle. But what we will also need to do is think about what are our supplies, and I think both the gentlemen here have talked about supplies. We're in competition with other global buyers, because whatever Brexit Britain might be, taking back control, we can't control energy supplies. We have to compete and pay for it. That price is going up. Now, if the EU strikes a deal with Russia, and Russia significantly increases, or the Nord Stream 2 comes online.
That's the one that goes down.
That's the one that comes over, drops down through the Baltics and everything. Yeah. Now, if that actually is opened up, that would make a difference to the supply of gas. The Norwegians have already started piping it to the UK, so that's very helpful. But all of this, is not within our control. That is beyond the United Kingdom's control.
Okay, so prices are going to, I'll come to you about long term, if I may, in just a moment. Prices are going to go up, and those most vulnerable people in our society are going to have to be protected. Is that your view, John?
Well, prices are going to shoot up, obviously, because the commodity price of gas has gone up 500%. So in the short term, customers are protected by the price cap. But that, in a way, it's slightly counterproductive, because one thing that we should be doing this winter is we should have a campaign for people to use a lot less gas. And obviously, if the gas bill had doubled, they'd be thinking about it. The cap keeps the price down in the short term, where we need to make a few things which are relatively straightforward to reduce the gas demand of a typical house by about a quarter.
Can I just ask you this? It's only just occurred to me. Are we talking about piped-in natural gas, or are we talking about bottled gas as well? I ask this from a personal point of view because my cooker works off propane tanks that I have to get from the local shop.
No, we're talking about piped-in gas that comes in from the street to run the central heating. It's that has gone up sort of 5-fold. Yeah.
So if my local supplier says, I'm going to charge you 5 times what I would normally do for this propane, I tell him, you don't need to do that.
There's 85% of the houses in the UK are heated by natural gas. So we are sort of stuck with that. And we might be able to move away from that over 20 or 30 years, but certainly for the next few winters, we're all on gas. All you can do is try and use less gas.
OK, thank you for solving my personal issues and also for suggesting those ways of saving energy. Richard, let me come to you and ask you the same question. There's a short-term answer, which I hope you'll give me. There's also a long-term solution to this, one hopes. Start with the short-term one.
Well, the short-term one is probably a little bit outside my day-to-day remit, I have to say. But one thing I would stress, as well as that very vital residential and domestic population that use gas, I'm sure there are a lot of industry and business activities that rely on gas for energising and heating and other processes, industrial processes, which, as a ports person, you'll forgive me for saying we must keep the economy fired up and burning away, pardon the pun, because trade is essential to what things that we do, and getting manufactured goods out and turning other products that we import into final things that we ship out to companies and individuals, I think is essential. Long term, I would just say I think a diverse strategy is presumably the most sensible approach. As I say, we need to move towards a position where we can provide our own energy as well as importing large amounts. But if we have that our own resource, then we're much more protected against these global trends. And I would see offshore renewable energy production and the potential for job creation around that sector as being an ideal one for the UK in our geographical location.
Indeed. So Tim, in terms of our economy, what is any knock-on effect of this going to mean?
Well, we've already looked at the impact on inflation, which has been talked about, and there's been a huge debate. Inflation, if it is going up, and the Central Bank of England and the guru economists have been telling us it's a temporary blip. Some of us doubt that, and I think the push you're going to get from energy costs will further push inflation. If inflation rises, the governor of the Bank of England and the Monetary Policy Committee will have to raise interest rates. Interest rates go up. You know what that means. It means more expensive mortgages. It means all sorts of knock-on effects around the economy. Yeah. So, we are talking about things that matter to people. And, if you talk to your wife about costs, even down the local supermarket, costs are rising quite fast. And energy costs are a component of inflation. So you can't disaggregate all of this.
To quote Yogi Berra, I think he was a baseball player, he said, "This, to me, is deja vu all over again." Because going back to that same winter of discontent, I remember being offered at my first radio station a pay rise of 24% or the level of inflation, whichever is higher. And it was higher than 24%, so we got a decent pay rise. But that was a terrible time to try and exist as a young person.
I mean, this is where we have to. I think we're coming out of an extraordinary period of monetary easing with massive central bank interventions across all of the Western economies in particular. And what we're now facing is a complete resetting of economic policy, potentially. And the consequences of that are somewhat uncertain. This is just one component amongst many feeding into a difficult picture to read. So it doesn't surprise me that no one has a definitive answer.
Let me come to John on this. We've only got a couple of minutes, but you're looking to the future. I'm sure we all are looking to the future. But in terms of renewables, what big help do you think the renewable sector actually needs to push on more quickly, to get us out of this situation forever?
Well, I think what I like is what they do in Norway. They produce a lot of oil and gas and they tax it and they use that so that everyone can drive a Tesla and everyone can have heat pumps. And I think we should do the same here. So we should be doing offshore wind, we should be doing offshore oil and gas, and we should be taxing them because they will all be incredibly profitable. And then the profits from that would fund insulation, would fund heat pumps, would fund electric vehicles.
John, we're going to have to leave it there with you. Richard, I'm coming to you and I want to ask you this. Is it going to be a bleak winter for those in your business, for those in peril on the sea or dealing with the sea?
I think there are certainly challenging times if we do see a slowdown in the economy. So it's imperative that the government does all it can to make sure that there are measures in place to ensure that the country is supplied sufficiently. And just a final thought, I think we haven't really touched on the government and sort of global sustainability aspirations with net zero targets, etc. I think we can't get away from the aims and aspirations of the country and indeed the world when it comes together at COP 26 later this autumn in agreeing challenging targets on things like energy provision and use. I think that is something you just cannot ignore at the moment.
Crikey. I wish we had time.
Well, I was just going to say, absolutely vital. We all get that. Get out your duffel coats.
Several of them.
Several of
Thank
them.
you, each and every one of you. Just when we perhaps thought it was safe, to misquote Jaws, to get back into the world or go back into the water, we find that there are so many things out there out to get us. It's going to be a turbulent few months. Listen, thank you to my studio guests, to my guests at distant locations, and thank you wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. I hope to have your company next time. Until then, for me, David Foster, goodbye.